Tetragrammaton.
It's the unspeakable mystery, the representation of a sound wave from which everything springs. Tetragrammaton is an online collection of curated material. Is it a library or a gallery? A museum? An oracle? We hope to find out.
Tell me about the very first issue of whatever became Vice. What was it first?
Well, that's a long, complicated question to answer. It was a Black culture magazine called Nuit d'Afrique in Montreal, and they figured they could get more money if they did an English language as well as a French language one. So that was called Voice of Montreal. A guy named Sarouche Alvey started it straight out of rehab.
How do you meet Sarouche?
Well, I came back from my brother's wedding. I was living in Greece, where I just came from now. And my friend Gavin at the time had become comics editor. He's like, oh, this guy Shane would be great. So I came down, met them. And that was just sort of this weird mag that wasn't that great. And then we slowly took it over, did a lot of hip hop, and we became sort of a street mag.
I see.
At some point I was like, well, why isn't anyone reading my genius, And they're like, well, we have to print more copies. It's like, well, how do you print more copies? We have to sell ads. And I'm like, what's an ad? So I would hitchhike down to Toronto from Montreal. There's no money in Montreal.
Yeah.
All the money's in Toronto. So we would hitchhike and we'd take the city bus out to all the record labels, and we would pitch all the record labels, and we started getting more and more ads. And then they couldn't pay me my commissions, so we're like, okay, well, we own it. So we dropped at that point we were a Voice. We dropped Voice of Montreal, then we were Voice. And we dropped the O and became Vice, bought the company, and then started going crazy.
Would you say it was a fanzine to start with? Is that how you describe it? How do you describe the original idea?
I mean, Canadians are kind of like Japanese in that we're on the periphery of the world, especially back then. So we were like culture scientists. Like we would know everything about music or fashion and stuff because we were kind of far away from it. It was like hipsters before hipsters in the sense of people would study culture. They would study music. They would study fashion. That's like when we came down to New York and people were like, who are these Canadians, that are on point? Like, how do they even know anything? Because Canadians are seen as being corny and whatever. So, yeah, I don't know. We weren't necessarily a fanzine as much as a sort of, we were like cultural scientists, I guess.
And was it primarily focused on music at the beginning or no?
It was everything. It was music. We started doing streetwear and skate fashion when that was new, hip hop, punk rock, and then weird stories, like stuff that we just found interesting, like freaky business.
Were you more influenced by the American culture or UK?
Both.
Both.
Yeah, Canadians are sort of hyper aware of the sort of British music scene and comedy, sense of humor, and then but also like we live next to America, so a lot of the music, we get both sort of UK punk and American hardcore, and so we were, I would say half and half.
And tell me about Sarouche and tell me about Gavin.
Yeah,
those were your first two partners essentially.
Yeah. Well, Sarouche is like you'd love me, Zen guru, kind of really beautiful guy. both his parents are professors, very smart, you know, ran into some problems in college with drugs, and then sort of asked the law for help and came out and started Vice, and was just a super good vibes, like just a super, like we're best friends to this day. We talk every day, like 30 years later.
And you both grew up in?
He grew up in Montreal. Gavin and I grew up in Ottawa. And
How
then
far?
moved to
How
Montreal.
far apart are those?
2 hours. And then Gavin and I knew each other since we were kids. Our dads knew each other, and we were part of the Ottawa punk scene. And the Ottawa punk scene was like non-existent. You literally had to like make your own band, rent your own venue. You know, make your like do DIY to the millionth.
Who would have been the bands that you were most influenced by to become a punk band at that time?
Minor Threat, Bad Brains, you know, DC hardcore.
Yeah.
Misfits. Misfits were big in the French Canadian, so we were sort of half French, half English.
So first wave American hardcore punk.
Yeah, that sort of. You know, you remember when punk was like, it was punk and there was hip hop, and then they did these weird punk hip hop mashups.
Yeah.
You know, so that was our era, and Wu-Tang was our era. Like when Vice first started, I believe we were the first guys to ever bring them to Quebec.
Wow.
When they came up, yeah, and everyone showed up. Chef Raekwon and Old Dirty Bastard.
Wow.
We got Old Dirty Bastard out of jail to come play a Vice party.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And in those days, what was distribution like? Like, how many copies did you print, and who did it go to?
In the early days, we printed, I don't know, 35,000, which is a lot.
Yeah.
And newsprint, and so it's like tons and tons of pallets. Anyway, so we knew we had to, so we started distributing to like mom and pop records, sorts of stuff. And there was a company called Voyageur, which was a bus company, and we would, like Greyhound, and we would trade them ads, and we would come with these big pallets and put them on the buses, and the buses would take them to like Winnipeg or Vancouver or Saskatchewan.
But primarily Canada.
And then it started getting bigger, and then the bus company was like, we were coming with pallets.
Yeah.
They're like, we can't even fit them up. Then we started distributing in New York, and
At that time, were they free?
it was always free. It's always been free. And we started doing it in New York, and people thought we were just weird, like who are these weird frogs from Montreal doing this? And in New York just blew up for us, and so.
How many years into it did you move to New York?
4. And then so when we moved to New York, then it just exploded. Like there's a rich dude in Canada, Richard Sawinski, and he bought us and moved us to New York in the .com bubble, and we were like, cause we were skate, like we never had any money, like poor. I left home very young, punk. And then all of a sudden we were, you know, walking around New York in sort of Prada pumps, and so it was like, you know, sort of comedic, like we were Canadian yokels just going asymmetrical zippers, and we had money for the first time ever, and that's when I bought my place in Costa Rica. I'd never had any money, and then I got my first taste of money. I'm like, I bought a farm in Costa Rica because I'm just like, I'm just gonna spend all this money. So down in New York, losing our minds, and then they promptly went bankrupt, and so we bought the company back. I guess that was 1999, somewhere around there, 1999. And we moved to Brooklyn. We had so much money when we were with them, the other company, that we were going to buy like all these companies. One of them was 555 Soul, and put them all together and do this e-commerce. So it was going to be like basically Amazon before Amazon. It would have been huge, but it was 10 years too early. So we were going to buy 555 Soul, and then Troy was like, "Oh, it's okay, kid. You can have my part of my warehouse." So he gave us like a corner of his warehouse in Brooklyn. And
what was Brooklyn like at that time?
It was, I mean, heaven, but it was like our warehouse had like crack vials and everything. Like, you know, hookers were giving blowjobs on our staircase. We had to hose it down all the time. It was the Wild West, and it was just, that was real early days, the beginning. but all the artists were out there, all the bands came, like that was the thing. We were in the right place at the right time because we became Planet Brooklyn. Like when all of these artists and musicians and everything, that movement came out of Brooklyn, we were just there and chronicling it, and like all the, Yeah Yeah Yeahs and Interpol, the Strokes, and all those bands that, came out of there, TV on the radio, everybody was just like, we were just in the right place at the right time, and we just, as Brooklyn sort of blew up, so did we, and those are the glory days. 2000, from like 9/11 to like 2010, that was just, it was good to be alive.
And was it primarily New York Magazine at that time, or were you trying to get it everywhere in the country?
No, that was the fun part. Is I believe the first city we went to for some reason was Tokyo. I don't know why. I think it was some sponsorship between the Canadian and Japanese embassy or something. We launched in Tokyo, and I just fell in love with Japan. I was like head over heels. So we were.
And they also have a culture of refined taste for American cultural stuff and all culture.
Obsessive.
Yeah.
Obsessive. And so we just got along. I loved Japan and fell in love with Japan. So we were doing well in Japan, doing well in New York. Anything that does well in Japan and New York, it does well in London. So we went to London. And then we came up with this business model where we would go find...
But you could get the magazine everywhere or only in those cities?
Only in those cities. At this point, only in those cities.
Okay.
But then we would go to like England, and we'd meet cool people and say, okay, we'd do a deal. We had no money.
Yeah.
So we'd do a deal where we'd find a publisher in England, and then we'd find our editor or whatever, and then we'd form like a little company, and then they would do England, and they would distribute England the same way we distributed.
But you would send them content, or they would create their own?
So we would do, it was a best of. So they would come up with some of their stuff, and each country we added, it got better and better, because it would be like, this is from Berlin, and this is from London, and this is from, Italy, and this is from, Japan.
And were everybody punk rockers in all these places, pretty much?
Or music heads or fashion people, depending on as it grew bigger. And then that was, again, so 9/11 to 2010 was mostly Planet Brooklyn, punk rock, fucking booze and coke and lunacy. Then, like 9 to like 15 was like, you move to Milan, you get an apartment, you find an office, you hire other people, you live there. Like you go to Cinque Terre and meet the grandmother. You go here, you have a big party and everyone comes, and bands and celebrities, and you can't get into your own party. And then you're like, get on the train and go to Sweden to do it there. Like, what about the baby? And you're like, I gotta go. And and you're just like, you would live everywhere for 6 months, and it was just so much fun, like to just travel around the world. And
is that how most companies are built? I've not heard this story before, so it's interesting.
Yeah, it was all grassroots, and we just built it from the ground up. And that's when like it was making money. It was growing like wildfire, and like we were getting the best content, and it was kind of misfits. Like we never had money to hire people who knew what they were doing. So like when Spike Jonze said, hey, you guys shoot everything in the magazine, right? And we were like, yeah. And then we went back to the office and were like, how do we do that? Like we didn't, just get a camera, I guess. And so we just started filming shit from the mag. And that's when it really exploded, because it was just as YouTube was starting, and the mag was like at its peak. And then at this point, we were doing about 1 million copies a month, which is for us like insane. It took us 10 years to get to 1 million copies, and then in our first year, we got to like 100 million video views, and we were like, oh, here we go. So we started doing online video of our articles, and that's when it just went, to the moon.
Amazing story. Content-wise, similar content. It was just a change in format from the written word to video, would you say?
Yeah, the content changed a lot over the years. Everyone thinks that they're like, No Vice, or we're guardians of Vice. All the editors were guardians of Vice, but there was no real. It changed and changed, and it kept changing from, and as we went more and more international, that changed it even more and more. I think that's why it was good, is because it was always fresh, and also we didn't take ourselves too seriously. When we went online, yeah, that was when it was like, because people used to make fun of us because of our story ideas, but we were getting, like, we would write something like, there's a true story about a shipping container that went to Africa of Tupac Shakur t-shirts. And then they stole it or whatever. And then they became like an army, the Tupac Shakur army, right? Because
How did you first hear the story?
who the fuck knows? I don't know. Like we get 100,000 of these a day just coming in. Like people, you gotta. So the story was General Butt Naked and the Tupac Shakur army, and it was basically this guy who fought naked with his army because they believed they couldn't be killed, was fighting the Tupac Shakur army. We're like, well, that's a story for Vice. And then,
So did you go personally?
so I was like, well, let's just go shoot it. Like, how bad could this be? So we flew to Liberia to meet this guy, General Butt Naked.
Had you been to Liberia before?
No.
Okay.
No. And like, again, we'd never been anywhere. And we would go, I think we flew like Air Belgium for like $400. Like we had no money.
Yeah.
And we were staying at, I don't know, some grim place in Liberia. Anyway, and then you meet General Butt Naked, and he's talking to you about not only killing people but eating them. Like he was a very famous cannibal, and you're like, holy fuck! And then there's all these other generals, and he's introducing these other generals, and the stories that they're telling. And like we went to Monrovia, we went to West Point, and West Point is like the worst slum maybe in the world, but definitely in West Africa, and it's fucking gnarly. And everyone, by the way, it's
Were
so
they happy
poor.
to see you?
No. Well, not happy. They want money. So
Okay.
they're like, holy, like, how much is those shoes? Like, how much is that? Like, it's just like money and cameras and shoes. And like, they just want any kind of money. And so it's hyper, like if you're anywhere for a long period of time, you just get surrounded by tons and tons of people. I remember I bought when you buy like a drink, they buy like a Coke or something. They pour it, like little bits of it into like a plastic bag. And I bought some for some kids who were around. And then, the bigger kids came out, and then the bigger kids came out, and it became like a little fish eating a bigger fish. And you're like, no, I just wanted to be like it's rough and really rough. And
Did you ever feel in danger?
oh yeah, yeah.
So how do you deal with that?
There was two points. One time we got this guy. So there's all these different generals, and one was General Mosquito, because mosquitoes are terrifying because of dengue fever or malaria. The General Mosquito, and then there's General Mosquito Spray. Oh, that's it. So one was General Bin Laden. So we got General Bin Laden out of jail to go interview him. And then as we were interviewing him, the whole building got surrounded by like, I don't know, 200 guys with all machine guns, his army.
How would you get somebody out of jail?
They just bribed the
I see.
cops and said, can we have him for a bit to interview him?
Yeah.
And
So you'd say in general, you could make things happen in most of the places you went?
yeah. And yeah, that was scary. That was Liberia is a scary place. And but I also you get a bit of Stockholm syndrome because you're hanging out with Butt Naked and he's saving you from a lot of these, because he comes out and everyone's like, whoa. So you're like, oh, I'm with him. I'm with Butt Naked.
Yeah.
It's just a weird place. But
Did they also, everybody spoke English?
yeah, because Liberia is actually formed by America. So it's called
Explain.
So it's so it was Marcus Garvey.
Mhm.
So Marcus Garvey led this back to Africa movement. So it's freed slaves who went to Liberia, means freedom, so liberty, Liberia. So they bought a portion of West Africa. They went to West Africa. The capital city is called Monrovia, after Monroe, who was the president of America at the time. The Constitution was written in America, and in Liberia they have like people with African names and people with American names, right? Like Charles Taylor, famously, was the worst Civil War guys, and so the Americans, the freed slaves, went to Africa and promptly enslaved the native Africans based on the plantation system that they had learned in America. So that there was a slavery system where the American freed slaves enslaved the local Liberians. So then that started.
Did you know this story before you went?
Yeah, I knew the basics. Yeah. And Charles Taylor is famous because he became like this. He killed so many people. He was backed by us, and Butt Naked, was against them. And so
You called him butt naked, or he called himself butt naked?
he called himself Butt Naked.
Interesting.
That was his general. He was General Butt Naked. They literally would fight naked, and they believed that couldn't hurt them. And he would tell us like crazy stories of like, yeah, before we would go to war, we would get a child and cut out their heart and eat their heart before going in because we believed it couldn't kill ourselves. And meanwhile, this is a guy who's openly telling you that, walking on the streets, like telling you these stories, and you're like, it's just so. Coming from Brooklyn and flying into these places and meeting these people, you're like, what? But that's what Vice became. So anyone says, well, what is Vice? The content of Vice. It became like just fly into the place and press record. And also this whole thing of objectivity or subjectivity. They're like, well, you're supposed to be objective. It's impossible to be objective. You're coming from Brooklyn to a place where they're talking about eating babies' hearts. And you're like, yeah, I'm not going to, oh, well, So that whole like the whole voyage of going there and being subjective of like, this is how it's affecting me and stuff, became a sort of signature, Vice style as well. And then from there, we started sneaking into like Iraq, Afghanistan, Iran, and yeah, that's when it got gnarly.
When did it turn to be more? What the things you're describing are more, I would say, more hard news versus culture. Yes?
It was both. We got into news by doing culture because we did a feature called Heavy Metal in Baghdad, which was about the only heavy metal band in Baghdad. So we were following.
Was it illegal in Baghdad?
No.
It was okay.
No, you couldn't be heavy metal.
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah. So it was the only heavy metal band in Baghdad, and we happened to be there shooting while George Bush Jr. went and did the whole mission accomplished thing. So he's in the green zone saying, we're done, we won the war, and we're in the red zone getting shot at. And so all the people who were watching this said, well, the war's not, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, those war's still going on. And so we came at it through that point of view of like, we're to go back, news, the golden era of news, was basically somebody in New York calls a stringer in Afghanistan. Majority of stringers don't leave the hotel. They're rum soaked. They call back in a story. They put it on the teleprompter, and Walter Cronkite reads it, and they're like, everybody believes it. Everyone's like, yep, that's the news tonight. And God knows if it's real or not. And it's also really colonial. Like, it's like a bunch of white guys who've been to Harvard or whatever, going to thing, writing it, having their take on it, whatever. So our take was just go there and press record and see what the fuck's actually going on. Mm-hmm. And 9 times out of 10, it's not what they're telling you. And you see a completely different side of things. And especially if you embed with young people or locals or, people who are like-minded. You remember like Maximum Rock and Roll?
Yeah.
Before the internet, like Maximum, you'd go to different towns and you'd meet someone from Maximum Rock and Roll, and you knew that you were kind of like-minded and like each other, whatever. Well, news or Vice or whatever was like this. It was like an entree. That's why we got the Vice rings made, because it'd be a secret club. And you'd go and you'd meet people like you, and they'd say, look, I'll come fucking show you what's really going on. And we noticed that a lot when we went to Afghanistan, because everything that they were saying about Afghanistan was bullshit. And we said it like 5 years before America left Afghanistan. We said, yeah, America's going to leave Afghanistan and the Taliban's going to have more territory than when we came in. We called it 5 years before because it wasn't because we were geniuses. It was because everybody in Afghanistan would tell you that.
Yeah.
That's when it became hard news, and that was the HBO era. That's when.
How'd the HBO deal even come to pass?
We did our first Vice News deal with Google, and because we were in the beginning of YouTube, we were like the largest, one of the largest video publishers, and then we became #1 for video news. So
on YouTube.
On YouTube.
I see.
That's when our numbers were through the roof.
Yeah.
And everyone used to be, they still decry me for saying, oh, we're going to be 10 times the size of CNN. We already were, because they would have, I don't know, like a 1.5. So like 1.5 million people, or even if you put in international on it, it would be like 15 million would be a massive, massive audience for CNN. And we were doing like 150 million video views per video. And you're like, okay, I mean,
No
we already
comparison,
were.
of course.
That's when it was massive, because when YouTube was like roadblocking news for us, it was just fucking huge. Not making a lot of money, but I remember like going from some nobody punk kid to like, I was in India somewhere shooting, and people were going, oh, it's Shane Smith, it's Shane Smith.
Wow.
It was just online was exploding. So then we did a little stint at MTV, which wasn't great. Vice Guide to everything. And they wanted to be more zip zap diddly app or whatever. And I remember going to the party where they said, we're not going to review. I think we did 2 seasons. We're not going to renew season 3. I said, don't worry about it. We're going to HBO anyway, because HBO is at MTV. And so we had no discussions with HBO. But Ari Emanuel just went to Richard Plepler, and Richard Plepler is like fucking immense, the greatest guy ever. And he's just like, let's make some news. Let's make news. They've never done it before.
Wow.
And I'll never forget, because we worked so hard on that first season. And at the end of it, we figured out, because I've been to North Korea a few times, we figured out that Kim Jong-un loves basketball, and that if we could get, they love the Chicago Bulls, if we could get the Chicago Bulls to go over, so we called up Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, they're like, yeah, no. But the Worm was out in Denver, I think, signing autographs for
Dennis Rodman.
Dennis Rodman.
Yeah.
And sorry, his nickname's the Worm.
Yeah.
And he.
So it was your idea.
Yeah. Because I'd been there, I'd seen. So they have the House of Treasures, which is 2 miles under a mountain in North Korea. And you go and you see all the treasures. And like one of the biggest ones is this basketball signed by Michael Jordan, and given by Madeleine Albright. And so basketball is the biggest sport in North Korea. So we sent Dennis Rodman and the Harlem Globetrotters to play. And then Kim Jong-un invited our whole crew back to his house, and the whole world exploded. Like every newspaper was like, fuck Vice and stunt journalists, and they did this bullshit. I remember.
Tell me about the experience.
Well, we had just done this series, which, by the way, ended up tying Bourdain for the Emmy.
Wow.
And our first foray into news won the Emmy with Bourdain. And so, primetime Emmy, like real.
Yeah.
And so, we were really proud of that first series. And then we just got shat on about this North Korean thing. And I'm like, the BBC shot on us a lot. And we're like, hold on, you tried to sneak in like a student group, like you're endangering the lives of a student. We figured out a way to get in and get access in a view that nobody else has gotten. And we just were getting shit on. And I remember being like torn apart. I remember lying in the bath and reading these reviews and going, wow, like we tried. And we launched to a 5, which is, I think it was second only to Game of Thrones. It was like a huge number especially for a news show. And Plepler was like, that's what these, all press is good press. Don't worry about these assholes.
Yeah.
And
So HBO was supportive of the fact that you got good numbers.
super supportive. No, they were supportive of the show.
Yeah.
We got good numbers because of all the press. I didn't realize that, because I was like, wouldn't be taken seriously. Like,
So the bad press actually fueled.
oh yeah. The reason why we're successful is because of all that bad press. It was like a $10-20 million campaign.
Wow.
For the show. So when that show launched, that's when everything changed, because we started winning Emmys. And like, to win an Emmy, Emmys are a racket. It's like, if you win, you get a vote. And 60 Minutes have been getting Emmys for like 70 years. ABC News, CBS News. It's almost impossible, to be the new kid on the block and win Emmy. So we started winning Emmys off the. We won Emmys, we won Peabodys and Polks and Pulitzer. And so you're like, you had to be really good.
But you were also doing real journalism. Like you were breaking stories that nobody else broke.
Yeah. And so
And stories that people were actually interested in because they would watch them.
Yeah. that was the glory days, because we would come up with a story, go shoot it, have a ton of fun, come back, cut it with your crazy bad news bears, and it would go up, and then you'd be at the award show. Like, it was like you could, whatever, you would think it up and I remember saying to everybody, like, enjoy these times, because this is how documentary filmmaking works. Like, you go pitch something for 3 years and you make it for 3 years and it comes out and nobody watches it. So that was just glory days. That was like, I think we were 7 years on HBO. That was just like.
Why did it change? What changed?
3 things. Plepler Laughter was ousted, and he was sort of the visionary. We also, because the show was doing so well, like, it went from like 8 was the first buy, and in that year we did actually 12. They bought 4 more. Then it went to like 22.
More episodes.
Yeah, then it went to like 56. Then we went to a weekly show, and it was just too much.
Hard to keep up that level of good content for that much.
Lots and lots and lots. And somebody was like looking at it, and at one point, because we were doing so much, they're like, we're spending more on mice than we are Game of Thrones. Now, Game of Thrones was doing 12 episodes, and we were doing fucking 100.
Yeah.
But like, it was a lot of money, and most shows don't last over 5 years, because that's when it gets more expensive and whatever. And then Plepler left, and we were having a hard time, keeping up with the, because if you're doing 12 to 20 episodes, you can just really concentrate on knocking them out of the park. But we went to Showtime after, and we kept winning Emmys, and it was good, but it was never, like, it never had the same cachet as those HBO. And that was at the pinnacle of HBO's, like, that was like Game of Thrones, and anyway, all like Girls, and I don't know, there was like 4 big hits on that they had all the time, and then there was us. So they were killing it. And then after that, like, now HBO's Max, and you're like, I don't even know what Max is. Like, why would you change HBO to Max? Anyway, so HBO changed, the media industry changed, we changed, and there you go.
What were the other things going on at the same time? So it sounds like from a focus perspective, the HBO series would have been the most watched thing you were doing, yes?
Not by numbers, because online, like, our O&O we were doing at our peak like 1.3 billion, 1.4 billion video views a month. So that would be much bigger than HBO. Mm-hmm. HBO was status. It was like,
I see. You had success in the old media model as well as the new media
there
model.
You go.
I understand.
You should be in media.
Yeah.
So we were killing it on TV, but I mean, online was 10x that.
Right.
So that's where we were making our bread and butter, and then we expanded into, we bought a TV network, and we started into agencies and bought studios.
Let's talk about each one of those. The idea of doing the TV network.
Well, look, I'm a hustler, and I called it years and years ago. I mean, I made a McTaggart speech. I've said it to anyone who will listen the whole time. I don't know what it was when we started, but it was like 55 cents of every dollar went to the big 4. Now it went 60 cents and 70 cents. Now it's like 82 cents of every dollar goes to the big 5. And so that's 15 cents left for everybody else in the world. So independent publishing was heading for a wall, and everybody knew it. And it's funny, because 5 years ago, everyone used to say, Google and Facebook, YouTube, Amazon, like, these guys are taking all the money. And everyone's like, yeah, and it just got worse and worse and worse. And then everybody just went, oh, well, what are you going to do? And so we knew that was going to happen. We saw it happen. By the way, I think everybody saw it was going to happen. So we're like, okay, let's use the insane valuations to buy things that are going to be, it's like a hedge fund model. So you say, okay, well, we'll take our valuation, we'll buy a distressed media asset, which is a TV channel. And ironically, we have the TV channel today, and it's throwing off money because it's just a TV channel. They just throw off cash. So, yeah, we did it as a plan to sort of offset and to, we built 5 different legs of we had an agency.
So you diversified because of the limitations
on digital publishing.
On the growth in digital publishing.
Yeah.
Because it was becoming more and more, the mainstream was taking more and more of that space.
Yes. Well, not the mainstream, because they're in the same not mainstream media like the old school guys, who now are in the same boat, ironically, that we were in. Anything that's advertising based is screwed, because all of a sudden Google came along with YouTube and Facebook. Facebook runs like a lot of online video. What they don't run, Google does, YouTube. And so between those two, Facebook, BuzzFeed did a lot of work with Facebook, and they were just going through the roof. And then one day, Facebook just changed their algorithm, and they just, BuzzFeed have. So to say we were reliant on them is to understate it. And
Did you ever have that experience with YouTube where
it changed the algorithm?
Yeah.
It was more of a Facebook thing. But when we were partners with YouTube, it was definitely easier to sort of get the traffic. Then, I mean, there was a long period of time when you were doing SEO optimization and you were buying traffic, and everyone was about the traffic, O&O traffic, O&O traffic. And then all of a sudden, when like TikTok came up or Instagram, then it just became about all screens all the time, because you just couldn't, your O&O couldn't compete with TikTok. So then it just became being everywhere, which is great for numbers, but terrible for money.
Looking at the media landscape today, how different is it than when you were able to do what you were able to do?
100%. We started when desktop publishing was just sophisticated enough where three idiots could make a 16-page print mag, right? So it was like literally just coming. And now, everything's on phones, everything's on these massive platforms. The consumption is through the roof. I mean, if you see, by the way, I called this as well, like in my McTaggart speech, I'm like, look, there's going to be massive consolidation, which has to happen not only between the online companies, but between the mainstream companies, because you have these big, massive companies with ever shrinking audiences. But you have one audience that's growing and just consuming stuff. What are they consuming? Well, going forward, I'll tell you what they're going to be consuming. They're going to be consuming AI, because you can just print anything, it gets made. And then you print this, so it's going to be personal AI channels, which has your stories, your, hosts, your this, your that, and it's going to be everything becomes everything for everybody. So no one could have ever predicted that that's what the future of media is going to be, because all of these big productions, all of the studios, going out in the field, and digital video teams, and people who have cameras, and that's 3 years away from being obsolete. So I could have never predicted it. Now it seems crazy, but we used to get in shit for going from a magazine to online video. People were like, oh, it was like Dylan going electric.
Yeah.
You sell out, and fuck you. Yeah. We were so angry. Gen X is so angry that we became millennial because we went to online video. And now we're going to a super studio format, which is what everyone's doing. Studio is the only way you make any money. Obviously, we get shit on and whipped. Fuck you.
Is there any point in the Vice story where you feel like Vice sold out?
I wouldn't necessarily say sold out, because we were always independent. We always sold pieces of it. I would say that.
But from a content perspective, do you ever feel like did you ever pander in your content away from what you actually liked?
The problem with content, and what people don't understand, it's the same thing with TV. People don't put content on that they like because they like it. They put content on that rates. Right. And so Vice, to go back, around 2017 at the peak of the HBO era or whatever, because all of our big clients, Google and, the studios and everybody was out in LA, I moved to LA. And so I sort of stepped back from day to day, but kept doing news. And Vice, the other channels, not the news and whatever, started moving, because we always say, give the company over to the interns like every 5 years. and Vice started moving like into this sort of weird woke, era or whatever. But it was young people writing for themselves to the audience. It was like our audience went from like millennials to whatever that is, Gen Z, and they were writing for themselves to themselves. And by the way, traffic was through the roof. But the old Vice audience, including me, were like, what are we doing here? And also, one of the mistakes was Vice News was over here, which I was concentrating on, and it was still killing it and doing the awards and all that stuff. But like, people didn't differentiate between Vice.com and Vice News. There was just Vice. And so I think that was a fuck up. We should have had a lot more differentiation. And I mean, the go woke, go broke thing, I'm well aware of. And a lot of times I'd see stuff and you'd be like, what the fuck? And then you go to give someone shit, and they're like, okay, the one you liked, 10 people saw it. The one that this bullshit was 100 million. Like, that's just what fucking young people want, you old man. And you're like, oh, well, it's a it's a problem with digital media, in that it changes with the audience. And the audience now, the young audience, that young digital consuming audience, is that audience, and that's the content that they want. And so, it became problematic. And definitely, to be speaking of selling out, like Disney or any of those corporate partners, they didn't want that. We didn't want that. It was just sort of this, we had, I don't know, 5,000 employees doing 7,000 pieces a day, and just all of this stuff would come out, and you'd be like, what the fuck is this shit? Like, what the fuck? So did we lose control of the bicycle? Yeah.
If you were to go back to the original model of the HBO show, and if you decide to do 8 to 12 episodes a season now, and found the right distributor, whether it be the Netflix or Hulu or whoever it would be, do you think that it would have the same impact that it originally had?
I don't think so. I think you have to be in the right place at the right time. I also think, for example, Netflix, like the big guys who could do it now, Google, Netflix, Apple, Amazon.
How could Google do it now?
Well, hold on. They won't do it now.
But how could they?
Well, because they have the largest audience in the world. So they can do anything.
But if we're talking about a TV show,
well, now there's no such thing.
No difference.
Yeah, it's the same thing. Like Apple has TV shows.
Right.
They never get shown on TV. They get shown on Apple TV.
Right.
But the big ones now, if you really want to do well, it's Amazon or Netflix, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
No is the answer, and I'll tell you why. Because Netflix in particular, if you do a news show, then you do a story on Modi, and then Modi gets pissed off and then kicks Netflix out of India, they've just lost $22 billion business because you said, I don't like Modi. So, they're not going to do that.
It's too dangerous for a big corporation to back this kind of content.
Super dangerous. And news on TV doesn't work and hasn't worked in a while. It's aging up, and it's just now there's fear mongering. So Fox is just fear mongering, and MSNBC and all that is just comedy, making fun of the fear mongering. And so we believe that there's a huge middle, like the silent majority, of centrist, sane people who are not being catered to. And, so we're going to try to make news products for them. And you hit the nail on the head, which is, can it be like it was in the HBO glory days? The answer is no, because there's no HBO. And it was the beginning of all that shit. But there's an opportunity now. For example, what you're doing, like podcasting is this new frontier and it's exploding. And we said, like, if we wanted to do something around this election cycle, because it's going to be, we're already seeing, it's completely sheer bull goose lunacy, and it's only going to get worse. So we were like, let's take the biggest social media meme. So it's like, millions of people going, oh, fucking, Let's take them and let's deconstruct them. Let's talk to people on either side. Let's do it like a scientist. Let's do it like a journalist. I'm investigating. So let's go investigate. One of the things I loved doing was we went to Antarctica. We went to Greenland. And Greenland is melting. And Greenland is something like 2 meters or 3 meters of sea level rise. It's melting as fast as it can. So we're like, hey guys, like Greenland melts, we're all screwed. And we got, this is at the peak of HBO, we got inundated. Like usually we get something like 10 million comments. We got like 28 million comments, and usually it was like 60% positive. It was like 90% negative. There was just bots and everyone fucking going crazy, on me especially. So I'm like, okay, let's follow the story. So we found the traffic. It was all conservative think tanks, and they're like, there's more ice ever. In Antarctica, it's shifting the poles, there's more sea ice. Antarctica. We went to a conservative conference and the think tanks, we interviewed everybody. Then they're like, it's Antarctica, you idiots. So we went to Antarctica, met with all the scientists, like, yeah, it's melting as fast as it can melt. We're like, well, what? And they're like, yeah, well, there's always flat earthers. We're like, flat earthers is 45% of the fucking American population. They're like, well, we're not salesmen, we're scientists. Like, what do you want us to do? I'm like, they're not. They're saying, you work in that area, they're saying that there's never been more. And they're like, yeah, well, there isn't. Like, they're wrong. So, to go back to my long-winded story is, we want to do that with political memes. Like, for example, the $24 Big Mac took on everything, and Biden's got its fucking $24. It's everywhere. And we looked, I have these traffic guys who used to work for me at Vice News, and they're like, yeah, it's all coming from China, CCP, Chinese Communist Party, because somebody had posted somewhere $24 and it had gotten some traction, so they just turn on the, there's no $24 Big Mac. In fact, McDonald's came out and said, yeah, it's $4.95, whatever the fuck the Big Mac is. There's no $24 Big Mac. And so then it sort of was like, bing, like, all of these conspiracy theories, all of these people, like, on the right, on the left, you know, and I'm just like, let's call them. Let's just talk to them. Let's call the people who are fucking on either side of it. They get their point of view, and then also see where the traffic's coming from. Because a lot of time, it's coming from Russia. Like, Russia will tell you openly, yeah, we're trying to fuck your election. We're trying to fuck your electoral process. As is China, as is the Free Syrian Army, as are Iranians. Like, so many people are trying to fuck with our shit. And so you just have these young people going, ding, ding, ding. And the reason why I got back in the game is so many of the people I was working with would just say something that's preposterous, as if it's a given. Like, that's not even, we're not even discussing that. That's just part of the thing we got to, the given. And you're like, that's not a given, dude. That's bullshit. Like, where are you even getting that? And I think that what's happened because of the first Trump election was he did an amazing job of, they would say, fake news. And he'd say, no, you're fake news. He literally just did a kindergarten, like, you're fake news. And it worked. And, well, oh, that's fake news. And this, now everything's fake news. Nobody believes anything anymore. This is a huge problem because there's no basis of truth. Because everyone's just like, that's bullshit. Well, and like, if you, cherchez la femme, if you look for the source, the sources are all these fucking nefarious, weird. And everybody is, by the way, just throwing so much fuel on the fire. So we're like, let's try to find these 10, 20, 30 massive issues that no one agrees upon. Try to talk to people on both sides, try to talk to experts, and figure out where the traffic's coming from. And wouldn't that be an exciting show? So we think that'll be a little bit more interesting than just the sort of shotgun approach of the HBO show, which was just like, let's figure out what's interesting in the world today.
I'd be really curious to see that. I'd like to see that. Great.
Well, this is the first one. We're doing it together.
Cool. Was Vice ever banned or censored?
Yeah. We used to say we take the Sex Pistols brand of marketing, i.e. get banned and go number one. In Canada, so America, you have freedom of speech. In Canada, they just censor the shit out of everything. So we had Vice. It wasn't even an article. It was a skate ad, and the skate ad got banned at my alma mater. Like, so Gavin and I went to Carleton. We're going to McGowan. He went to Concordia, but we were at Carleton, so we used to distribute in Carleton. And they banned us from Carleton. And then the Carleton newspaper ran the article and used the same image, and using the same methodology, they banned their own newspaper. Then the gay and lesbian newspaper wrote about it, used the same image, and they got banned. And that's censorship. Like, I was like, and then of course all Canadian media called us to say, you know, what happened? We're like, well, that's censorship. Because obviously you should censor us because we're filth, pornography, terrible, horrible, garbage. But then the next guy gets banned, and the next guy gets banned, and the next guy gets. That's what censorship is. Everybody wants to censor something. And so I love any kind of censorship argument because I've been on it my whole life. But yeah, we get banned all the time, and fucking, you get banned and your kids love it. Like, they're just, you're off to the races. So we've been banned, I don't know how many times, tons and tons of times. In Europe, we come here, we get banned. Italy, actually, you have to register with the local council, and local council has one clergyman. So can you imagine Vice giving every month to a fucking clergyman to say, okay, let's see what we got here. And it's like, which dildo is best for a donkey? And which, you know, like, and it would be like,
Was that ever a real Vice story?
I don't know. I mean, it sounds like a Vice argument. There's a funny meme where the guy gets a dildo and he goes, country, and it hits like Tunisia, fucking, you know, animal, it's like donkey, the sexual device vibrator, and it's like, it's an actual Vice thing. It's like Tunisian donkeys are being fellatiated by vibrators or whatever, and you're like, okay, it's like, I can take a good joke. But you're like, the Vice articles became, and headlines became a bit fucking rich at the end. And there used to be a thing called Not Vice or something that was just, you had, it was like online, and you had to pick which was a fake Vice headline and what was a real Vice headline. So it did become a bit rich, but anyway, yeah, we got banned all the time.
Tell me the story with John McAfee.
That was a weird one. He was on the run in Belize. I don't know who he was on the run from, because we couldn't figure out if he had made it all up or if it was real. And I think it was 90% made up in his head, but maybe a little bit real. So we sent a reporter down there to go follow him. And then
He contacted you?
yeah.
Was that normally the case?
Yeah, a lot of times. I mean, we contact people. Everybody knows everybody. So like, oh, my uncle knows this guy, or oh, they cost. And at our peak, everyone's like, oh, I got a story for you guys. So we sent somebody down, and then they were following them. Then they decided to go on the run with them or whatever. And then I guess they took a picture of him, and then but it had the metadata still linked to it, so that they could find him. But I don't know that anyone was actually looking for him. But we got in shit for the metadata picture.
From him or?
No, he didn't. I mean, he was with us, and I don't know that they ever caught him. And I don't know that he was ever.
But if they weren't after him, why
Yeah,
would the
that's the
metadata
whole
been
thing.
a problem?
The whole thing about it was like, the internet blew up for a day about it, and you're like we were involved in it. It's still unclear as to whether or not he was actually being chased. But you know, he was a freaky guy, and you know, the person who went down there was just whoever was in the office, I guess, went down there and took a picture because he said take a picture, and they didn't take off the metadata. And anyway, so I forget how it ended, but I think he got caught. They went through and then let him go. So it turned out to be much ado about nothing. But
What were some of the other places that you flew into and got to experience something unusual, let's say?
so many. The one I remember was, there's another great story, which was this guy named General Abdul Rizik, and he was like a teenager, or a kid maybe before he was a teenager, in Kandahar, and the Taliban are from Kandahar, and when the Taliban came, he got kicked out. His parents were killed. So he's like this young kid, went through the tunnels into Pakistan. He's like sweeping the floors in a shitty shop in Pakistan, like illiterate, fucked up, and then becomes a teenager, goes back through the tunnels and gets this teenage gang together, and they just start killing Taliban. But they look like fucking Adam and the Ants. They have like these, weird shreds of things, colored not ropes, like colored ribbons that they wear on, crazy colors. They look awesome. And he was known as the Taliban killer. He's a teenager, and he when the Americans invaded, they said, bring us anybody who's fighting the Taliban. So they bring him to Kabul, they train him, they give him just like ludicrous amounts of money. And he becomes the police chief of Kandahar, and then eventually governor of Kandahar. And it's like Kurtz, like when he went into this region and all enemy activity died. So he goes to Kandahar, where the Taliban are from. Zero Taliban activity.
Wow.
Fucking kills the shit out
Wow.
of him. You can imagine he's not a good guy. Lots of killings, lots of torture and bad stuff. He's a bad guy. But he becomes, I think, maybe the biggest drug dealer in the world, like running the opium into Pakistan. He has all this gold bullion. His brother kills Karzai, the prime minister's brother. So, like, super powerful guy. So I flew in to Kandahar. And in these places, like, you have to wear, like, so it's funny.
You have to dress as if you're from the place.
Yeah. And so I'm pink. So it's funny because I went into Northwest Frontier Province with Sarush, who's Pakistani, so he speaks Urdu and everything. And I had just come from shooting in Kashmir, which is another hotspot where they're having a war. And so I was wearing Kashmiri chappal. So a pink guy, I had a long beard and handed the beard because that's what they do there. So I handed the beard and I was wearing Kashmiri chappal. And I remember they asked Sarush, does your religious leader require any dietary restrictions? Because there's only one guy who's got a pink face wearing Kashmiri chappal, and he's a badass. Because a lot of the top fighters and the top come from Dagestan, which is in Russia, because the Dagestan is where sort of the Spetsnaz run it, and so basically it's like super training ground so if you go into the force, it's called, if you're Muslim, you fight the Spetsnaz, it's the Russian special forces, so you become super badass. So those guys then go out and train everybody else, like the Taliban and Boko Haram and everything. So they thought you're one of those guys. So anyways, we go interview him, and I don't speak Pashto, so I'm sitting there talking to him in English, and then there's translating the news. So anyway, finish the interview, fly to Kabul, which is grim, but this is how bad Kandahar is. When I flew into Kabul, I'm like, it's like Paris in the springtime. You're like, there's hotels and there's food. Oh my God. And so I hear this knock on my door, and they bring me to the American embassy, and it's Treasury, DEA, and CIA. And they're like, okay, we'll trade for you. We'll give you deep cover, meaning like we're not, deep cover stories, like we're not going to attribute them or whatever, but we'll give you the actual story. That's true. If you give us Ridzik, like give us the stories on Ridzik. And I'm like, he's your guy. Like you fund him. He's your guy. And he's like, yeah, he's off the reservation. And I'm like, I just spoke to him in English, and he spoke back to me in Pashto. I don't have any insight into that General Abdul Rizk. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. But if he's that far off the reservation, then this is a worry, because he's literally the Taliban killer. And the minute that guy goes, which happened, then Kandahar goes. So that was freaky, because you're sitting there going like, I'm this punk kid, used to fucking busk, for fucking quarters. All of a sudden you're talking to the CIA and DEA about fucking, trading for deep cover stories about fucking Taliban.
You show up in these places with a story in mind. Are you ever surprised by what's actually happening there?
Always.
And are the people who are the bad guys necessarily the bad guys? And tell me about this. Tell me about our understanding of the world versus your firsthand experience of the world.
Well, there's always a point of view. Like, for example, the Taliban are such bad guys. If they're American, they're freedom fighters, because we invaded their country, and they said, we're going to fight you until you leave. If you want to look at it objectively, they're very successful freedom fighters. They beat America. By the way, before that, they beat Russia. Before that, they beat England. They're fucking the empire killer, right? Why? Because they don't want their country to be invaded. Like,
And why is everybody invading their country?
well, geopolitically, it's very important because it's in between India and China and Iraq and Iran, and it's a sort of crossroads.
More location than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, and it's also very difficult to tame. And so if it's very difficult to tame, then shit can go down, like training camps for extremists, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, that's the whole thing is like, 9/11 happens and they say, okay, we're going to go there, which at least had a modicum of sense because they had training camps there. They're also like, we're also going to invade Iraq, which had zero, absolutely nothing to do with it. But we're just going to do that too. We're just going to go in there. It's ludicrous. But if you go to Afghanistan, I mean, are they good guys? Or are they nice? I mean, you can believe in them or not believe in them, but they are fighting for the freedom of their country. And everyone forgets that. And we dehumanize them. And we tell all these terrible stories about them. And everybody jumps on board. And that's what I'd say is surprising, is that everybody, all media, will just jump on board with the political narrative and just nobody deviates from it. And I got to give it to Al Jazeera. We do have colonialist news, which is our point of view, and our point of view is right. And if you go to the countries, they're like, yeah. If you go to Iraq, we went in there and mismanaged it so badly that we created Al-Qaeda, not Al-Qaeda, we created ISIS. America made ISIS because we created this vacuum. And then ISIS came along, and you're like, well, that's not good. What we did in Afghanistan and what we did in Iraq, were bad things. And the how we get it back here, the propaganda is propaganda. That's one thing. Wars have propaganda on both sides, and one side always believes that my side isn't propaganda.
Have you spent any time in Russia?
Yeah.
What's that like?
A lot of time. They've had an interesting time where they were the shit. They were number two, and then, Yeltsin gets blamed for a lot of stuff, and basically Putin is trying to get them back to where they were before the way they see it is we had a complete economic collapse, and everybody feasted on our corpse, And I remember saying, when I was in Russia, Putin, is he communist? Is he fascist? What is he? They're like, no, you don't understand shit. He's for Russia. And you're like, okay, got it. But on the political spectrum, because he's part of the KGB, but now, no, Shane, he's a patriot. He's for Russia. So he wants to get Russia back to, those old borders and those old territories and all that stuff. A, B, I talked to Lavrov, who's the foreign minister, and he'll say that, and they've been saying it to anyone who'll listen. If you put missiles on our border, for example, in the Ukraine, it's exactly the same as putting missiles in Cuba or Canada or Mexico. We're not going to we're going to retaliate. They've said that for the last 20 years, and then you would go do it, and you're like, what did you think was going to happen? Yeah, unprovoked. Oh my God, what happened there? And so when you go, there's two sides of every story, and poor Ukraine is Vietnam. It's a proxy war that's being fought in its backyard, and that's unpleasant for everybody who's there. But there's two sides to every story, and that's the one thing that's really messed up in America now is we don't have two sides to one story. We have one side that's hyper impassioned and angry and won't even listen or talk to the other people. And you're like, you have two parties in America. But that's the other thing. When I first came down to America, so I studied politics and economics. And when I first came down to America, Bubba Clinton had done, he had shrunk government and had the largest surplus of all time. And then Bush increased the level of government and had the biggest deficit of all time. So basically the Republicans and the Democrats switched their whole basis of their whole political mandate. No one in America said boo. No one said shit. And that's when I realized a lot of this stuff, and now it's with Trump and Biden, which makes for fucking insane political theater. But a lot of this stuff in America, because America is not a democracy, it's a republic. And if you talk to the founding fathers, they're like, yeah, it's made to do nothing and to do it very slowly. But a lot of this stuff is bread and puppet theater. Like it's to give the sort of mass imagination that this is a massive democratic process, that there is agency, that you actually have some sort of, democratic country, and you're like, well, it's not set up to be a democracy. It's Republican, and you have two parties. That means one is in power and the other one's in opposition, so they're always in power. And so a lot of this stuff is bread and puppet theater, but now it's amplified to the point of just impassioned lunacy. And the thing that we have to watch out for is, I was in Yugoslavia during the war there, and what happened was Tito kept everybody under his thumb, but he was afraid of the Soviet Union, so he put a machine gun in everybody's house. So when he died, everyone just started shooting each other because they all had machine guns. No problem if you don't have machine guns, you have machine guns. And now America's just been arming itself for the last decade, like super arming itself. And no one is listening to each other's point of view. Like Democrats, like kind of like the old Soviet Union, America, like, oh, Russians eat babies, oh, American gays. Like the Democratic and Republican propaganda against each other is like dehumanizing and doing this war so that, and that's terrifying because you're like, it's a fucking Republican Party versus the Democratic Party. Like it used to be, and it should be, nothing. Like whoever you vote for is whoever you vote for, and then you're done, and we get on with life, and who cares? But it's like a declaration of fucking war. Like it's crazy now. So good for media and good for news and good for what I'm doing, but terrible for everybody else.
Tell me about the home you grew up in.
That's a weird question.
Really? Seems so straightforward.
Really?
Yeah.
It's funny, I've been thinking about it because I just came from Greece. And I think Greece was like the first, like I was young and beautiful for the first time, and punk wasn't part of my persona, and it was gorgeous, and it was weird, and
Pre-punk. This is pre-punk.
Yeah. No, this is post when I was fun. Okay. I'm getting to that. But it was like I first discovered beauty, in that sort of 18, 19, 20. Before that, sort of Ottawa, no money, punk, everything was very grim. Very, like we celebrated the working class. Like I worked as a bartender from a very young age, so I had money, so I left home at a young age. There was a lot, punk rock palaces, like you could be in a band, and then you would pay the rent out of the band money and stuff. So I grew up like playing in punk bands.
You lived like in a commune with other band guys?
Exactly. My parents, like I had a fine family life. Like my dad was very strict and was like, you have to learn how to build a house and build a car, and you had to get straight A's, and you had to box, and you had to do this stuff. Because his dad was self-taught and ended up being this big war hero and even though he, left school in, I don't know, grade 8 or something. And so he was a real harsh taskmaster. So my dad was like, look, life is tough, life is hard. Life is like a shit sandwich. The more bread you have, the less shit you have to eat. But the only guy to ever lose money on insider trading. So he never really did well. But he's an academic, smart guy. But just, whatever. Life never worked for him. So basically, I left home very young, punk, using my dukes, hustler. Then I moved to Greece, and I was like, this is on the menu?
How did it work out for you to move to Greece?
I was in a band, and we were just tooling around busking, and then I went to there. We were busking, and we were in Athens, and the guy said, you want to come out? And he gave us a house on the beach. We could eat in any restaurant, drink in any bar, and we had to play one night at the Hard Rock Cafe, 1 hour a night. I never left. I'm like, this is the greatest fucking thing ever. But it was the first time I was like coming out of this real working class punk, northern, cold, trench coaty world, all of a sudden wearing like flip flops and shorts and just being tan and beautiful and being like, oh my God, this is great. And I was saying, like, I used to say to Suitors, 1 more year and then I'm going back to Greece, man. Yeah. 1 more year and then I'm going back to Greece. It's my like ontological paradise. But yeah, I don't know, my dad was a harsh taskmaster. My mom was overprotective, sort of Irish.
Do you have brothers and sisters?
Brother, and then so
older,
they got older. They got divorced, and then we were so out of control, these young punk kids, that my mom got remarried to sort of put some rational, we were going crazy. And because of that, I left. I said, fuck you. And then left home, and but I had a good relationship. I still have a great relationship with him. But it was just like, oh, well, now I'm a man. I was 14 or 15, and like, okay, fuck it, I'm out. And then it was just, like, there but for the grace of God go I. Like, when you're 15, 16, 17, you're not making the best of decisions. But I was obsessed with just, getting out there in the world. All my friends and brother went to university. Most of these bands were in university. I was in high school. So that was one good thing, is that I wanted to get out and go to university and like be with my buddies. So at least I didn't like just, drop out of school. So that was good. Yeah, I just wanted to get out. I wanted to get out of Ottawa and like get out to the world. And so I spent a lot of my time before Vice just traveling. And then when we did Vice, I spent most of half my year on the road. I love, going to see as much as I can.
How do you think growing up in Canada impacted your outlook on the world?
Canada is sort of weird because we're kind of sanctimonious. We're like, we give more in foreign aid than everybody else, and we do this and this. We also gave reactors to India and Pakistan. So don't do anything bad with them. And they both, exploded atomic weapons. It's a kind of a sanctimonious place, but it's a great place to grow up. It's like the definition of the Canadian characters, we're not American. And Vice was beloved in Canada. And until we went to the States, we're like, yeah, we love America. America's great. It's the only place you can come with no shoes. I came from Costa Rica and I had literally no shoes because someone stole my boots. I had flip-flop. And you can become a millionaire. It's the only country in the world you can do that. It's amazing. And Canadians are like, fuck you. And they wanted us to hate the States. I'm like, I love the States. I think it's great. Now, this is this whole political theory. Like, politics, it's ugly. Like, it's an ugly country. And you have homeless people, like, living right next to the richest people. Like, we could do a better job. Or, like, it definitely could be, especially it's the richest country in the world, like, it could be managed better. And it should be managed better. But so I think you get that from Canada, but you also get like, we're better than you because we're not that way. But we're also really small and really rich. I think there's a lot of countries that are sanctimonious because they're tiny and rich. And if you're tiny and rich, you can get out of a lot of the problems that the big countries have. Like India has 300,000 people who would be considered like middle class. They have 1 billion people that are poor that you have to pull up into that middle class. That's a huge fucking job. I don't have any water, right? These are massive. And like, so Canada, is a massive country with tons of money. Anyway, it was a great place to grow. It gives you a perspective of being one step away and sort of being able to see stuff and say, like, you can see, for example, the political spectrum in the States and go, you see it a bit more for what it is rather than, like, I was born into it. Like, it's like a sports team or something. Like, it's going to be the Phillies until I die kind of thing.
Yeah,
Okay.
you have a little more perspective because you're coming from the outside.
Yeah.
How would you describe your temperament?
Oh, my Lord. That's a good one. Much changed. I mean, I was very hard charging. I was like, I speak French. Why don't you speak French? Like, why don't we all just know this kind of thing? I was very aggressive and, probably a bit arrogant. But, a calm sea never did a good captain make. Like when I was the blue-eyed boy rolling down the hill catching money, I was the smartest guy in every room. And then after sort of a few belts to the head, you're like, you know what? We should maybe think a bit more and listen to them a bit more and read a bit more. And, I think now probably much happier. I mean, I'm pretty lucky. I've been happy most of my life. But like comprehensively happier. I got much more sort of, I contemplate things, or I think about things more. I think it was Carl Sagan who said, like, it's insane with all the billions of years, that it took to get to this point, and we live in this tiny little eye blink of like the air works and the temperature works and this works. But not only that, if you look within that envelope of human existence, we got to live in like the only era ever without major wars. Like, we didn't get stabbed with fucking pitchforks, and food is delicious. Like, food, it's not like this rotten fucking moldy bread, and all foods are, and like you can travel around the world. Like our era, and God knows if that. So that's the other thing. I don't know if the HBO era that continues going on. Like, let's say the Gen X era. The Gen X era is pretty goddamn good. So I'm very thankful that my envelope happened to be probably the greatest envelope of human existence. So that's good. And now also, like, when Bill called me to do this thing, I'm like, people want me to get back in the game. And I was watching this thing about like ageism in America, that like, if you're 40 and you don't have a plan, you're fucked. And if you're 50, just fucking, and like, for us, we still get to fucking do what we love to do. That's a fucking blessing. Like, we're not like, oh, you're fucking old, you can't do anything. Like family, like happiness at a cellular level. So I think I learned a lot. It's funny, I studied philosophy in university, and I think it's completely the ass backwards. Like, we should study philosophy now because you read it. You're like, this is so but when you're a kid, you're like, I don't fucking know. What do I need to write to get an A? It's fucking, So now, like, I read a lot more, and I also like appreciate pretty much everything. But being able to get back in the game and being able to do something with a little bit more understanding of the complexities of it, and a little bit more understanding of, look, there has to be some place where people can go where they believe in what you're saying. And that, I could retire and fucking live my serene existence, which, by the way, is great. But if you can still do something and be, use your skill set to do something that isn't shitty, then that's just fucking great. So comprehensively happy, but like grateful to still be in the mix, and grateful that, the arrogance and like, we were a self-fulfilling prophecy, and I used to say, if I don't believe it, who else is going to believe it? Like, you have to believe it. Perhaps that's why I was so hard charging, because I'm like, we're just making this up as we go along. Now I don't have to do that anymore. So you're just sort of like, okay, let's look at this, and let's try to do it right.
Also, your hard charging achieved a tremendous amount. I mean, it's insane what you accomplished.
Yeah, and nobody believed it. Like, everyone would say no. That's why we had to get like self-fulfilling prophecy. You had to be like, we're going to do this, because nobody says yes. We're going to go from $15,000 to the 10th largest private company in America. They're like, yeah, no, yeah, we're going to be the biggest. The reason why Canadians got mad at us is like, we're the biggest ever media outlet to come out of Canada, and we went, yeah, we're going to America, we love it. And they were like, fuck you, like. So there was, it was definitely, we didn't know what we were doing. And then when we put the Bad News Bears together, we just struck this alchemy. And at one point, we were making the best content in the world. And there was a time when you're just like, I knew, like, you can't keep the team together, but it was just a fucking great feeling. That was a really great feeling. And also to be vindicated when everybody says, you can't do it, you can't do it, you can't do it. And then you do it.
Yeah. When did Tom Preston get involved?
That's a great question. Tom is just the best guy. I love him to bits. I don't know if you know his story.
I don't really.
So he was a hippie, hitchhiked around, ended up in Afghanistan.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Started a company in Afghanistan and Delhi, clothing company. It was like hippie threads, and had a whole life. And then the communists, the Russians, came into Kabul, lost everything. I think he was like 38 or something. Like,
Wow,
yeah.
grown up.
Yeah, oh yeah, like, but had a life.
Yeah.
Was a millionaire, lost everything, flew back, and then Pittman said, "Oh, we're doing this thing," and so you know how to sell shit, like you sold pants and stuff. So he became head of marketing at MTV, and then when they sold it, all the other guys had equity except for him.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah. So they all laughed, and then he was the only one left. So like, you want to run it? And he said, I guess so. Ends up becoming CEO of Viacom. Super smart guy, amazing person. He gets ousted because Redstone's going nuts, and Philippe Darwin, who's used to be his lawyer, you know, gets in there, it's like Gollum or whatever. And then Tom started working with us, and he really wanted us to be big, to say basically fuck you to MTV. He did it again. And so we traveled all over the world together. Like, he would come to Afghanistan, and he would come to Sudan. He was an older guy. I mean, he fucking loved it. He loved being on the road. He loved going to these places. And when we were at the peak of our success, they did this thing where we were like 3 times the size of MTV. And MTV, when we did the deal with Tom, I had a deal, a clause where if Tom left, we could buy it back. And so we did. We bought it back for book value, which was $4 million at the time. And then it was worth whatever. When they did the article, it was $4 billion. And they're like, oh, that $4 million turned into $4 billion. So Tom loved it, and we loved Tom. And he's one of the last entertainment gurus. You know, like, these guys back in the day were larger than life, and now they're just lawyers with fucking police vests. But he was a hell of a fucking, still is a hell of a character.
Who were some of the suitors who wanted to buy Vice over the years?
Everybody. We had a deal done with Time Warner for 49%, because I wanted to get a TV network, so we were going to get HLN, and we were done. And then the guy came and he said, go talk to Bob Iger. And everyone's like, fucking, Disney's not ever going to deal with Vice. It's funny, I walked in and he said, I want to talk to you about copyright infringement, because in one of our pictures, there was like a huge dildo next to like a Frozen cup. And he's like, I want to talk to you about copyright infringement. He was joking. And I was like, oh, he's a very fucking smart guy. And he said, look, you've given these guys 9 months, give me 9 days. So I delayed my trip back to New York. We worked out a deal. I went back, told Time Warner I wasn't going to come in. And they, like 5 minutes later, the New York Times, boom, they dropped a story like, couldn't agree on price, like, i.e. I was too greedy. Then 2 minutes later, we released our story with Disney at 2.5, so we had 800 million of value in like a week. So,
Wait. 3, 4. 4 o'clock. How great is the
4
bell?
o'clock is a good time.
I love the bell.
Does somebody have to do that?
No, it's a
automatic?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, 9 to 9.
That's awesome.
Yeah. We were talking about Disney. You meet with Bob Iger.
No, it was the
You give him 9 days.
Oh, it was Suitors.
Yeah.
So Suitors. So it's everyone from Rupert Murdoch. That's another person. Everyone, Rupert Murdoch's the devil, Rupert Murdoch's the devil, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, yeah, he got Labour elected in the UK. Labour being communists here in America. He wanted access to power. Like, that's what he does. And so, like, he doesn't give a fuck if it's right wing now, maybe because he's older, but back in the day, he would just get access to power anyway. So Rupert wanted to buy us at one point. Jeff Bewkes at Time Warner, another great guy, Jeff. Tom wanted to buy us before that, and then Bob Iger. Yeah, so that's one thing is everyone's like, oh, Shane said no to Disney and now they're bankrupt, haha. Which is a great story. It's not true. Because I said yes to Disney.
Well, you said yes to Time Warner first.
Said yes to Time. I've never said no to money.
Right.
I'm a capitalist.
So
said yes to Time Warner. Then Disney outbid them.
yes.
And then we were working to sell Disney the whole company. And there was a time when Disney was trying to buy Snapchat and or Spotify. And I know Daniel and I was good friends with Evan, so I was trying to get in there, get in the mix. And at some point, Spotify and or Snapchat said, we're too big, like we're not going to do it. So they said put a hold on the whole, Vice / because we were going to be the content part of this platform thing. And then that's turned into Shane said no, and then they went bankrupt. I never said no. I would love to be part of a bigger platform. And that's in fact what we were building the whole company to be. And then because Disney pulled the plug, that's when we got into private equity. And private equity is like Scorpion and the Frog. They're like, yeah, we'll value at $6.5 billion. Fuck, let's go. And but then they put in all the ratchets and the things. And look, private equity do what they do. They're going to end up owning your company no matter what you do. So that was probably, not great. Like we were built for a strategic, i.e. like a
real partner.
Yeah.
Tell me some expert advice you got along the way that turned out to be really wrong.
All of it. All of it.
Give me some examples.
Private equity. I mean, we always had a rule for every page of content. We had to have a page of ads because it was a business, and if you don't pay for it, it's going to die, right? And so I was always really into sales. I was always really into like driving revenue, and then the whole company, including me, got caught up in this weird valuation game of just building up the valuation rather than selling and taking the money in and making it. You were just taking in, higher and higher valuations.
How much of your time was that taking versus on focusing on the content?
It's a great question. The advice I give to media kids and people who came into Vice and stuff, I'd say, look, concentrate on two things, content and revenue. That's what a media company is. Make great content and then monetize it. Now, it sounds like simplistic advice. Everyone will try to take everything away. It'll be HR, it'll be lawsuits, it'll be courtroom battles, it'll be proxy votes, it'll be rights offerings, it'll be raising money, and people like it's lawyers, and it's hundreds of millions of dollars, and it's exciting. And making content and like selling brands is difficult. So people get sucked up into it, and I think that happens to all media companies, and I think that's what's happened not only in new media, but in legacy media, because if you look at what's happening now, they have to consolidate and fire everybody because they're not driving revenue or interesting ways of having, because everybody's advertising based, and as we talked about, the big five are taking all the fucking advertising, so they haven't innovated, they haven't got into sub-based, they haven't got into anything new, and so they're just sitting there. Nobody's concentrating on revenue, no one's concentrating on making great content, except for Amazon and Netflix, because they can, because they have the money. I mean, Amazon, pretty soon no one's going to be able to compete with Amazon because they just do content as an add-on. Because
they don't need to make anything.
They don't need to, because they're going to sell everything in the world, and pretty soon the content's going to be like, it's going to be hot clicks. I want those jeans, I want that bottle of wine, and you're just going to be able to click anything on Amazon and just be able to buy it. It's genius. But who's going to be able to compete with that? No one can compete with that. Can't compete now. So private equity, you always think that you can control the beast, and you never can. What else was told to me? I mean, most of the advice of the day-to-day kind of stuff is always bad. It's mostly kind of lawyers and like, for example, we were going to do the Vice Guide to Everything, the Vice book, like the be-all and end-all story of Vice, the true story. The true story is phenomenal. We started writing it, and the lawyers are like, yeah, this is like 50 different lawsuits. Like, this is going to be insane. And you're like, okay, well, fuck it, we won't do it. So we didn't do it.
Just telling the truth.
Yeah. And then now the narratives are being, and we always used to say that, like, if you don't write your own narrative, then someone else is going to write it. It's not going to be your narrative or the truth. And so we didn't do it. And then now everybody's just writing the narrative, which is obviously like disgruntled employees or this or that or whatever. It's not going to be, and nobody like who's inside and who actually knew about the growth and knew, and so that's not, we shouldn't have listened to those lawyers.
Tell me about your experiences currency trading.
Yeah. Well, it sounds a lot, I don't know, sexier or, well, anyway, I went to Eastern Europe. So when I was studying politics,
How old are you at this time?
21, 22.
Okay.
So I was studying East European Soviet studies in college, and then the Soviet Union goes away. So I'm like, it was the hardest school to get into for politics. And I'm like, okay, well, they went away. So I went to Eastern Europe, and they had. So I went to Prague, which was where everybody went, but it was already inundated. So then I went to Budapest, and I taught English, and I taught business English, and then I was teaching business English, and all these guys were like, you as a foreigner can get a coveted, like a foreign company, and you can buy currency, and it's much better rate than the black market, which is like, So I had this book, and I was buying and selling foreign, and all of a sudden, like, I didn't have to do the school anymore. I was making a lot of money. I had a car and driver. I lived in the same building as Jules Horn, the prime minister. I tailor-made suits. By the way, this is a punk kid. Like,
It's really interesting.
yeah, it was super fun, except for when the Romanians, Transylvanians, who were running real money laundering, the bad guys, start catch wind that you're like taking their business, and it got very hot for a minute. And my brother said, "Oh, I'm getting married." I'm like, you know what? I'm going to take a little break. But yeah, it was basically like all money trading. There's a difference between the arbitrage between the black market rate and the other rate. What saved my ass was that because I was doing it with companies, I was sort of out of the spotlight of the bad boys for long enough to make some money. But what I realized about that, so that's a good question, but the real thing I realized was I'd been poor for so long that was my first taste of money, although it was not real because you couldn't leave hungry with it. But what I would do, like, I would go to like Venice, like I would work and get my money, and I would be rich and hungry, but the minute you left, you're poor. But I would go to like Venice for the weekend and like stay at the Daniele and fucking, and to a poor kid from Ottawa, this was just like fucking rain is exploding. And then, I'd go back, but like you couldn't ever really leave Eastern Europe because it was, the differentiation was so much.
What was Budapest like?
Oh my God.
Beautiful place?
Oh my Lord. Paris of the East. It's gorgeous, and it was not destroyed. Like there was no fast food, like there was no signs, there was no neon. It was just fucking beautiful. And speaking of, like, it had like the Roman baths. It was known for the baths. It had baths everywhere, hot baths, cold bath, this plunge.
That's where the water culture was invented, no? The bathing culture.
Yeah. Huge. Like, it was massive complexes of Roman baths. Incredible food culture, incredible wine culture.
How long did you get to live there?
2.5 years.
Nice.
And it was just fucking lovely. I've got to say that it just was opening up, and they were very excited. We were very excited. And
Did people speak English?
yeah, now it was, before it was more German. But,
How did you communicate?
a little bit of Hungarian, a little bit of English, a little bit of German, and now they speak English. Yeah. But yeah, Hungary is a beautiful country, but Budapest is like staggeringly beautiful. And yeah, living there and being like, you kind of felt like James Bond. You're like,
Wow.
like my car was a Muskovskaya, like the old Russian.
Yeah.
And you'd have, you're trading money, and you're like, yeah, this is fucking cool. Now, that's not going to go on very long. So when I came back and they said, come, let's do Vice together, that was probably saved my life. But the one thing about that is, after you get a taste of that lifestyle, you're like, fuck, I want to go back to my dad. The one piece of advice he gave me was that life is like a shit sandwich. The more bread you have, the less shit you have to eat. It's true. Like when you have a little bit of cash, it's fucking nice. You know? And so that was the first thing that ever gave me a taste.
Did you ever think about staying there?
Yeah.
Just if the quality of life was so good.
Yeah. I did. I mean, there's a few things. Like, I came back from there and found myself going, "Hello, Rick. How are you? Are you feeling fine?" Because, you know, and so that's the thing. And like, I don't know, Scooby-Doo, it's like a dog, like it's a cartoon. Like, there's no cultural references. Like, you're wearing weird clothes. Like, you become a hodgepodge person, like quality. And people that were talking about music, because I'd grown up in music and stuff. There's a whole new music wave going on. There was a whole new, like, everyone dressed different, everyone talked different. And I'm like, oh, I'm fucking off doing.
You felt like you were missing out on culture.
Yeah, and I like just being able to talk was a big deal.
Yeah.
And like food, like comfort food and stuff. Yeah, so I mean, I thought about going back, but at that point I was like loving. I mean, again, I moved back to Montreal, which again is one of my favorite places in the world. So it wasn't terrible. It was great. Montreal was great, but yeah, the one place that stuck with me was Greece. I was always like, Greece to me was always my utopia.
How were you involved in Greenpeace?
So my first job out of college was Greenpeace Canada, and I started out as a fundraiser, and then I ran fundraising, and then I ended up with a couple of other people running Greenpeace Canada, which is the biggest part of Greenpeace. Then I went to Switzerland, because the Greens got elected, and at that point they had 32% of the parliament. So I was very politically active. When I was here in Italy, I joined Partito Comunista Italia, went to Umbria, worked for Greenpeace, was very environmentally active for a number of years. Then went to Eastern Europe. The program was called Education for Democracy, which is basically go teach people English, but at the same time, like, talk about how democracy works and liberal democracy. And so very politically active. And then that, I think later on, that's why I sort of veered off from, the fashion and music and stuff into more political commentary.
Of the pieces that you worked on, are there any that got wildly popular that you never would have guessed would have been popular? And were there any that you thought would have been really popular that nobody cared about?
Yes,
Tell me about that.
Napoleon said, conquest has made me and conquest must sustain me. And basically North Korea made me and North Korea must sustain me. North Korea was insane. Like, North Korea I went from nothing to like hundreds and hundreds of millions of video views. I did not.
When you look back on the experience, forgetting the content aspect, was it a good experience in your life?
I mean,
from your perspective, going there and having the experiences you had.
The experience is like being on acid for a week. You're being watched the whole time. It's fucking weird.
Yeah.
It's
weirdest place you've ever been?
Times a billion.
Really?
It's fucking.
And
so
you've
weird.
been in weird places.
I highly recommend going because it's basically.
Can anybody go?
No, that's the problem. But it's basically a theme park for 1950s Stalinist Russia, 1960s Maoist China. Total cult of personality. Like every room, 2 pictures. Like everybody, state police. Like it's like going to Disneyland of what the world used to be under Stalin and Mao. It's crazy, and also studying that stuff. So it's phenomenally interesting, terrifying. Like state police run. And by the way, we're lucky that we live here and not there. Holy shit! Like there's stories of like going to concentration camps and people eating the kernels of corn out of cow shit. Like it's bad, but it's the most interesting. Like for example, the first time I went, we went to the Arirang Games. You know what that is? So it's like the largest stadium in the world, and they get the best and the brightest to practice for like a year to do this thing, the Arirang Game. and it's basically, I don't know, 150,000 people, and then they do pixels like they're human pixels. They go yo, and they do this thing where they do like highly choreographed things where it's the whole history of Korea, the communist history of Korea, by 150,000 people doing this fucking thing with pixels, and then like people flying through the air and the bottom, and like,
So is it like cheerleaders, would you say?
Yeah, like it's like a floor show of like maybe 50,000 people doing choreographed, like, no, here's an island, and now here's this, and now here's Mount Arirang, and then here comes Kim Il Sung, and here comes, like, which is like these 50,000 people here, and in the background there's literally like pixels, like I have to show it to you, but like they do a thing where it's like TV but made of humans doing choreographed pixels, 100,000 of them, and so I'm sitting at the dais where Kim Il Sung used to sit, the first one, and there's maybe me and some generals and whatever, and no one else. So it's 150,000 people doing this thing, and you're the
performing for you and a handful of people.
Exactly, like generals and stuff who are
wow,
and you're like, what the fuck is going on here?
Wow,
like what is going on? So that was the craziest thing that ever happened. I shot it. I can show you the thing. Because people wouldn't believe me.
Yeah.
So I shot myself with nobody there, and then there's the fucking thing. So that was crazy.
How did you get permission to go?
That year, we got refused. That year there were flood, which is why I was one of the only people there. They hadn't done the Arirang Games for 2 years, but that year they had to do them because the Chinese delegation was coming. So they wanted to get a few practice runs in. And what I was told was they were going to refuse everybody before the Chinese come. But if you go to Shenyang, which is a industrial city in northern China, right on the Korean border, you can go to the Korean embassy and pay like a entrance fee. And the whole thing was crazy. We went to Shenyang and they're like, we're not going to tell you if you can get in or not. We paid the entrance fee. They make you stay in a North Korean hotel there, which literally has concrete beds. You're like, what the fuck?
Really?
Yeah. They come in at 2 a.m. They take your passport. They take everything. They go, come on, go. They put you in like this fucking shitty like military bus. They take you to the military airport, and you put you on an old Tupolev, like an old aluminum fucking Russian plane, and you fly into Pyongyang, and you're like, holy fucking shit, we made it. Like we're in. And then from the second you get there, you're like, what is that?
Did you have any feeling that you wouldn't be able to get out? Was that ever a feeling?
We got caught filming. So what we did, because we're fucking stupid, is we got these like point and shoot cameras.
Were you not allowed to take pictures?
Well, you can go to specific areas and take a picture, and then when they say yes. But what we were doing is we got these like, it was basically the first time where you could get a big memory card, and so we put a memory card. You could do like, you'd shoot film like on your camera. So we would be like, I'm just taking a picture, And so we were doing that because you have a guide, a guard, and then a secret police. And where the secret police guy was watching us, we got probably a bit too cocky. And then he was like, Shane, give me that. And so I gave it to him, and he goes, why do you have a, 250 meg photo card? That's because usually, I guess they're 18, I don't remember the numbers, but it was like 10 times what it should have been. And I'm like, I don't know. I just played out. I'm like, I have no idea. I was in the airport. I bought it, and that's the only one. And they started, but that was our dodge. Like we knew, and they knew that they knew that I knew that they knew. And then I started going, oh shit, like they know, they know that we're fucking filming this fucking thing. So that was scary because one guy on that trip had a camera, and because they put you on in a hotel, which is it's like hotel murder. It's like this concrete box, and you go in, and it's just a concrete room. Like you imagine the carpet's been soaked in blood many times, and it's like there's a thing there that like it's like a 50s radio, but it's just listening to you. Like you can hear it listening to you, and it's on an island. right? And you can't get off. You're not allowed to go do anything, and you can't do anything unless there's guards there and all this shit. You can't go. So you can't do it. Like it's all choreographed. And this guy tried to fucking get off the island and go shoot, and he got caught. And they're like, "Yeah, you're going to jail for a long time." Something happened. I don't know. They kicked him out. He didn't end up having to go to a concentration camp, which you don't want. But they're very fucking serious.
Did you get to see how the regular people live at all?
Yes, and it's fucking wild. Because so the first, like, there's one that became most famous. I actually interact with people. There's like we stop at a tea shop and I play pool with the tea girl who's been in the tea shop for like 5 years playing pool. Who's really good at playing pool, but nobody comes in because there's no fucking tourists. So everyone's like, "What happened to the tea girl?" Because she's really cute and really sweet. And like, so they're like, "The tea girl, we gotta get the tea girl." And then I went to the DMZ, and you do your DMZ shit, whatever. But on the way back, like you see villages, and the village, it's so fucked up because they don't build like villages with like houses and stuff. They build villages which will just be like in the middle of nowhere. There's nothing, so it's like forest, and then there'll be like a 50-story Stalinist, like apartment building, you know, like the massive Russian ones, like huge fucking. That's the village. It's one building, two buildings. It's one, and then one big like amphitheater for like political, whatever, indoctrination, and then that's it. It's like, what the fuck? But because they have no money, they sold all the windows. So like, there's all the windows, 50 stories up, have been taken out. They've sold them. They've taken out the rebar, right, because to sell it to the Chinese. So it looks like this pockmarked. It looks like it's been eaten by like woodpeckers that eat concrete.
And people live in it.
But wait, so there's no electricity now. So they have, you see like on the 50th floor, like you'll see cooking fires.
Wow.
So they're carting up 50 stories water. They don't have it. There's no running water. So they go get water from the stream and like lumber 50 stories up to their apartment where they cook in cooking fires. And you're like, what? And like you see, you know, like at night, if you're ever out at night, which you're not allowed to be, like people like with scissors.
You are not allowed to be, or nobody's allowed to be?
Well, no, Westerners.
Okay.
Aren't allowed to go out. And so, so because Kim Jong-un came to our basketball game, all of a sudden they're like, oh, now we're going to show you this, and now we're going to do this. And so we got, like, because everyone has the same footage, because they give you the same tour. So all of a sudden we had all this new footage nobody else had, and that's why we got all this shit, like all this vices, stunt journalist vices. But we had the footage that nobody else had. So, yeah, North Korea is not a place you want to live.
Tell me the whole story of the basketball game. It's a wild idea.
So they have this mountain. That's the whole of North Korea is wild, but they have this mountain, and it's like they have like the Hall of Treasures, which is every treasure that's been given to either Kim Jong-il, Kim Il-sung, or Kim Jong-un. And so it literally would take you 2 weeks to go through the whole thing. Sorry, it's 2 miles down a mountain. So they hollow out a mountain. So you go down this mountain, and inside the mountain, they have like the first train that Stalin gave Kim Il-sung, like a train 2 miles down into a mountain, because they have to be fucking protected because they're treasures. But like there'll be like a bar coaster that Fidel Castro signed. Like there's so much shit.
Yeah.
And so you go through like weird stuff, like an alligator from some guy from Nicaragua, whatever. So you go through. Oh yeah, there's also a wax figure of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il with like a fan blowing their hair, and everyone has to go there and like, because they're still like, you know, and bow to them. By the way, as a Korean, North Korean, you have to go there one time in your life, see the treasures, and like literally 10 feet away from their leader and the president for life is this basketball, like signed by Michael Jordan. And I saw it, was like, that's so fucking weird. It was the first time a rapprochement since the Korean War with America, Madeleine Albright. They love the Bulls, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, we came up with the idea, why don't we just do a fucking ping pong diplomacy in China? We're going to do basketball. Well, I'll send you the doc. The doc's heartwarming because the Harlem Globetrotters were the stars. I mean, those guys are fucking amazing. And they played the North Korean national team. He showed up to the game, which was fucking insane because the people went apeshit because he's like God. They could say Mance.
Happy?
Oh, they say Mance, which means 10,000 years or something, and they're just like, ah, it's fine. like crazy for like, I don't know, half an hour.
Wow.
And then what was really fucked up is they said to the crew, yeah, come back to my house. So the whole crew went back to his house for like 12 hours.
Kim Jong-un.
Yeah. And so then because of that, we got access to everything.
What was his house like?
I wasn't allowed to go.
Oh.
For that trip, which I set up, during that time I was banned. I've since been back, because what happens is I do a documentary, and then they get mad at me,
I see.
and ban me, and then they say, okay, now you can come back, and then I do it again. So that one I set up, but they're like, yeah, you're not coming on this one, buddy. The doc is amazing.
It sounds amazing.
The doc is great, and like at the end, like the heart of goes, you see these little kids and their eyes light up, and they're just, that's what I like to it, because they're just regular people. Like we're like North Koreans, they're fucking North Korea, there's fucking bombs and lasers and shit. And like you see, they're just kids. Like they're just kids who like basketball,
Yeah.
and they're just stoked like to see somebody, and like it's that's the greatest thing about that is that you realize that it's all propaganda. Like everything is propaganda. So anyway, that's the one that surprised me the most, North Korea. The one that surprised me that didn't hit as much as it should have is we took the first sitting president to a prison to talk about prison reform. Got two
Sitting president of what country?
Obama.
You took Obama.
No president's ever gone to a prison. He had to lie to the DOJ and DOP.
Really?
Yeah, it was a big deal.
Wow.
And it was a huge...
How were you able to orchestrate it?
Biden came out to Vice in Williamsburg for like a day. They had snipers on the roof and all this shit.
Wow.
He came in to kind of basically vet us, that we would do it. Went to a prison in Oklahoma to talk about 56% at that time, 56% of all prisoners, which is obviously it's 25% of all prisoners in the world are in America. 56% of them were nonviolent drug offenses, most of them weed. And so we did a lot on weed, and always have done a lot of weed and decriminalizing, etc. So we went to Oklahoma, where something, I don't know, like 70% of their population and maximum security were 3-time offenders, like the three strikes you're out.
For weed?
For weed.
Yeah.
So we went there with Obama and won an Emmy, got 2 bills passed, bipartisan bills on reform, crime reform, prison reform.
Yep.
And like just it didn't hit, like
Really?
just didn't rate. It was very serious, and it was very, but like it's Obama in the fucking prison, freeing prisons for weed. Like I thought that would hit, and it didn't. The one that hit, actually, because we did the prison reform one, he gave me unlimited access. He gave me access to the last 6 months of his presidency, and I was going to give him a blowjob. Like we were just going to say, "Hey, fucking good job," kind of thing. All they wanted to talk about was the Tea Party and John Boehner and how fucking dysfunctional America was and how fucking shitty Republicans were. Like it was them. So I went, okay, now I'll go talk to John Boehner, who's a great guy, by the way. Went to go talk to John Boehner, then went to talk to the Tea Party guys, and then went, like, John Boehner, which I didn't know, speaking of how things work, speaker, famously him and Obama. John Boehner got ousted by the Tea Party because he even met with Obama. Like, he was doing his job, and he actually he was like a political mechanic, and he would get shit done, and he was like a whip, and he would fucking go do stuff, and he'd go meet Obama, whatever, just for meeting with the guy. That was his fucking job. The Republicans ousted him, and he's a conservative, and like he wasn't conservative. And so Obama was like, look, our political institutions are under attack. They've weathered us along. Democracy is, and this Trump thing is going to be an issue. And he kind of called it. He kind of said, like, this is going to get a lot worse. And that hit, like that was, I think, our biggest show on HBO. And but the prison one, which was an excellent episode, it didn't hit. So that's what I thought would for our audience, especially weed and prisons and Obama, You think like, all right,
How is running something big different than running something small?
running something small is all about how do I survive? Like, how do we keep the lights on? And if something bad happens, like, what is it they say? You know, Americans don't have like $586 if there's a
Yeah.
you know, some catastrophe. That's running a small business. It's like if something happens, we're fucked. I remember we had stores, and I remember so many times like the mag, like an ad wouldn't come in, and so we'd have to go like clear out the fucking the tills from the stores to pay. Like it's robbing from Peter to pay Paul. And then when you're big, it's like boardroom, you know, lawyers. And one of the reasons why I went to LA and sort of got out of it is I'm good at creating content and I'm good at brand building and revenue. I'm bad at lawyers and boardroom politics and all the stuff that you have to when you become
It's a different thing.
It's a different thing. It's also terrible. Like I just don't like it, and it's false, and you know everyone's lying, and you know that whole scorpion and the frog thing. You know, so I look, success has many parents, and failure is an orphan, and so when you're rolling down the hill catching money, everyone's your best friend, and the minute something goes wrong, like that guy was real thing. So the fun stuff is building, the fun stuff is making, the fun stuff is, hey, let's go to
when it gets big, it becomes essentially a corporate job.
It's a corporate job, and you have a lot of people that you have to appease, and quite frankly, you shouldn't appease them. You should just do what you're going to do.
Did you ever have advertisers complain about the content?
You know that's a big question. You know who's to blame for censorship and who's to blame for is advertiser on both sides, because we would do something and our audience would go up, but the advertisers were like, we don't know about that. By the way, nobody's safe. Like even the right, a lot of people go to the right because the left is so sketchy. If the advertisers take a second out, you're gone. They don't care. So the right, at least they'll stand by you more. But even Tucker Carlson got X. Like the advertisers will they're the modern day censors, and you know they're the ones that In fact, we did a thing. We actually won a.
What's their motivation though? If the goal of an advertiser,
if they want it to be brand safe, so we did a campaign, which won the first glass line or diamond line or crystal line or whatever it was, at Cannes Lions, because we did a brand safety campaign where, like homosexual, like gay, black, all of these were in the brand safety guidelines for all these brands, for the majority of brands. These were seen as negative terms that they didn't want their brand next to. And we're like, you want your name next to black? You want your name next to homosexual? Like, where is this 1953? So we actually did a whole thing to re-edit this sort of brand safety dictionaries, because we were getting nailed on everything, for brand safety. And yeah, they don't want their brands next to anything, risque. And you're like, well, that's what it is. I mean,
it's called Vice.
Yeah, exactly. But they are the modern day censors. Like if they pull their money, their advertising, then you're fucked.
What would you say are the biggest takeaways from the whole Vice experience?
Look, we lasted 30 years, which most people don't. It lasted a lot longer than I thought it was going to last. I mean, I wish it had ended differently. Well, it's not over. But, I wish my part of it had ended differently. The takeaway was the greatest thing in the world for about 15 years. And we, really, this was the bad news bears. We had people who didn't know how to shoot, who revolutionized shooting. We had people who'd never cut anything before, becoming the best editors. We never had any professional hosts. Like, it was just, hey, you go fucking, Baby Balls we got him as a joke because he was 92 pounds soaking wet with halitosis and dandruff, and he became our fucking most fearless fucking man in the street. Like, we did it so much of it we did as a joke, and people just resonated with it. And I think that that was when it was really fun. When it was, we were literally the bad news bears. We were shitty at everything individually, but if we put them together, there's this weird alchemy, this symbiosis that happened that, that led to this unique way of shooting and cutting and telling stories. That for a while was great. Then we got too big, and also everyone caught up. Like people started sending me like ABC News and CBS News stuff that looked exactly like Vice.
So you set a standard that
Or
then
they
got
look and
copied.
Feel, yeah, 100%. They like look and feel. Yeah, and then people would just say, "Well, just do that." And I mean, you could work for Vice and get a job back in the day when there still were jobs in media like that because they wanted to just rip it off, Which is funny because a lot of times it was like the Borg, like when you left the collective, like because it was no secret sauce, to Vice. It was like just like the editor would stay 24 hours to fucking cut the thing and polish the turd. The shooter would just fucking stay there to get the shot no matter what happened. The host would be like, I'm not leaving until fucking, or ask the questions that nobody else would ask. And all of that together made to this weird sort of alchemy. And that's one thing I miss, because I don't know that you'll ever work with a team that you'll put together like that again, because nobody in their right mind is going to put together a team that's never done it.
Yeah. Would you say what unified it all was the attitude? Would that be right?
Yeah. Also, I think a lot of people couldn't get jobs, and they were just like, well, this is my shot. Like, so I'm going to give it my all. And there's a lot of, we used to come up with taglines that we thought were funny. And like, my favorite was rumored to be among the best. but like,
that's like, really funny.
Yeah, rumored to be among the best. But we had one for a while, which is like less shittier. I forget what it was. Less shittier than everybody else. And that used to be our line. Like, just let's be less shitty than everybody else, because everything's so shit by and large. And then you're just like, let's try to be just not shitty. And I think that was the real ethos, that people would be like, come on, fucking, that's shitty. Like, the majority of stuff that comes in is just not great.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, let's try to make it good.
If you were to make a list of the things that worked and a list of the things that didn't work, what would you make those lists for me now? I don't mean content-wise. Yeah. I mean in building the company. What worked and what didn't?
Well, having people, I remember coming into our office on North 10, which was a rabbit warren of like, we put together like 40 offices because we had no money. We'd get that office, and then someone would leave and we get down, and it was like tunnels of things, whatever. And I remember going like, oh fuck, I forgot my thing. And I went there like midnight on a Sunday, and it was packed.
Wow.
Just rammed, because people were like, that's where they worked, and there they hung out. We had bars in the office and stuff, so people would just drink and they would just stay there. So that's what worked. I mean, when it was, I'll tell you, when it's us against the world, right? That's when it worked. When we did well, we bought a whole city block. Not bought it, we put together. It was like the Starship Enterprise. It was fucking like amazing. Edit suites and everything was fucking like, state of the art. And we had a farm where we grew our own vegetables and fucking thing. And that's when it went bad, because that's when it was like us against them meaning like us, like meaning the management of the company. Because when it was all the rabbit warrens and like you had to stand in line for the bathroom, whatever, we were all together. We were all on a mission. And when there was a time when I lived off of gambling because I didn't have any money. So then when I got, I made some money, I gambled a lot and I made a lot of money. One time I made so much money that I took the board out for dinner, and I spent a lot of money at dinner. Now, what happened was there was an earnings call for MGM, Bellagio, or whatever. And they're like, Vegas is back. There was a big whale. He came in, he spent $400,000 at dinner. And somebody called the restaurant and figured out it was me. Now, what they failed to mention, it was comped. I don't know if you know how comps work, but you can buy a cheese sandwich or you can buy a $400,000 dinner. They don't give you the money. Like, they give you a comp allowance, but if you leave, the comp dies. So I'm like, okay, it's comp. it's free, like
Because you spent a lot of money gambling, or
you
you
made a lot of money gambling.
Oh, okay.
So yes, they comped it, and so when I heard about it, I was kind of like, yeah, like I made a lot of money gambling, like I'm a good gambler,
Mhm.
and I got comped. But when the story came out that it was $400,000 dinner, that's when it became us versus them. They're like, Shane isn't one of us anymore, and that's when the union started and all this stuff, and it was us versus them, and
I see.
you're like, oh, like that was bad.
Yeah.
And to this day, you can't explain to someone. It was comped. It was like
Yeah.
you either take it or you don't. Like,
Yes.
but so that was bad. Very high up there on the bad list of what not to do.
It was the feeling of you guys had made it and everybody else was still struggling.
Yeah. And by the way, we tried to give away equity, and we tried to do that. And, we did. We gave away a lot of equity. And then I remember we had this thing, and we were like, would you rather have $10,000 cash or equity? And they're like, $10,000 cash. And we're like, okay. And I would give my own money because I wanted the equity.
Yeah.
But people just wanted money. And I mean, there were people who also had equity, that, like, it's not, if you're like at a Silicon Valley startup, they know about seed rounds and down rounds and up, and our kids had never had anything. So like, it was like, where's my money? And you're like, well, it's not a public company yet. It doesn't exist.
Did it ever become a public company? It never did. Was it close at any point?
We were going to do a SPAC, but like we were a day late and $1 short. Like SPACs were hot, I guess, in 22, and then we were going to SPAC in 23. BuzzFeed did a SPAC, and it just died. And so I think they SPAC'd at 12 and went up to 15, and now it's at like 1.
Wow.
So SPACs became like the devil. So we were going to do a SPAC, and then we just said, I mean, everyone was SPACing as a last-ditch effort. I mean, that's the other thing. It's not just us. Like BuzzFeed, who was number 2 behind us, did the same thing. And at one point, they were like, I don't know, $38 million market cap. And you're like, everyone's looking to say, like, I always say, like, it's like, who left the porthole open in the Titanic? Well, it hit a fucking iceberg. The iceberg is the big 5. The porthole is just fucking doesn't matter. But everyone's like looking for that person who left the porthole. But yeah, it's what I would say is it's depressing because it means like the sort of end, like that your last or whatever question before of who's coming up, who's the next vice, or that's the shame. There should be somebody who took vice and ate our lunch and is better than us and cooler, global and amazing. Fucking aren't they great? I don't think that there's going to be that. Not because I want to say I'm saying it's because independent publishing is general, unless it's very niche, is gone, because it's just all the air is being sucked out of the room. That sucks. That sucks for everybody. And what Vice was a bellwether for new media and independent media, well, we're also the bellwether for that's not happening anymore, which sucks. The best time of Vice were 3, which was living in old Montreal in a big loft, starting it from scratch, and having your peers go, that's good. That's a good thing. Like my dad was a prick and a tough guy and a harsh taskmaster. And I remember I was in Florida at ASR, and he called me up and he was like, how's it feel to not only have the best magazine in Canada, but the best magazine in the world?
Wow.
And that was big.
Wow.
Yeah.
Were you shocked by the call?
Oh, he's never said like that before. Even now I'm getting regret. Anyway,
that's beautiful.
So that time was good. The Planet Brooklyn time was good. But the best time was going country to country and building from scratch in each country, learning a bit about that country, et cetera, et cetera. You'd fly in, you'd spend 6 months, have a relationship, eat the food, speak the language, and everything.
Sounds really fun.
Super fun. At the end, it was fly in to a boardroom for 24 hours, sit with accountants and lawyers telling you about Vice, telling you about protecting Vice, and telling you what we should be doing with Vice. And then not having any fun, not having any juice, and then flying out again.
Yeah.
And so when you realize I used to have the freedom, because I control the business,
Yeah.
to go and build. That's what I'm good at. And by the way, we were spectacularly successful. What I was spectacularly unsuccessful at
Yeah.
was flying in, hanging out with lawyers and fucking accountants saying, here's how you should do it. And you just go, well, fuck you, which doesn't help anybody either. And then flying out on a plane just going, what the fuck did I just do?
Yeah.
That was terrible.
Is that the difference between what a founder does and what an operator does?
100%.
That's the difference.
You hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
The founder is like, this is my baby, let's build, that's great. And the operator goes, okay, publishing isn't making money, do it with somebody else. Okay, the studio's killing it, up with the studio. TV, fucking let's do it. That's what an operator does. And, you know, and they know how to manage those boardrooms, and they know how to manage those lawyers and accountants. Like at some point you have like 15 different outside consultants in these meetings, giving you all their whatever. I never knew who McKinsey was, and then all of a sudden I was surrounded by McKinsey things, and you're like, this is just terrible.
Yeah.
So yeah.
How bad were some of the ideas that you would hear?
I mean, I would say 90% of them were just awful, like
Yeah.
super bad. I mean, it's people who had seen something by Vice and they liked it, and then they come in and say, you know what we should do? We should do this. And you're like,
That's not it.
that was like shitty 17 years ago when
Yeah.
we did it. We're not going to do it again. Like
Yeah.
most of the ideas, yes. But lawyers, like they all want to be creative, or they all want to do this one. And you're like, what are you fucking? Everyone should have a mustache and wear yellow. And you're like, what are you fucking talking about? And everyone, you know what, too, like, you want to talk about being authentic. And you're like, the minute you have to say it's authentic, it's not.